Meeting. Call this meeting to order. Thank you for joining us tonight for this special agenda involving the Freedom to Leave Act meeting, Tuesday, July 2nd, 2024. We have our acting executive director and his King assistant administrator, Laura, both online with us. Thank you for that. So call this meeting to order. And thank you, Mr. Lee Holland, president of the FOP, for joining us tonight. I see a member or two from the councilman's office. We'll wait for the councilman, I guess, once we know he's on. But without any objection, I think it's okay to kind of move forward. I don't think we're going into any motions for any reviews or approvals for any agendas or past meeting minutes. So we'll just move forward right into this meeting. Before I do that, are there anything announcements and all from the members? Anything we need to bring up? Nothing heard. So tonight is about the freedom of the Leave Act meeting. Our guest speakers tonight are, of course, Mr. Lee Holland, president of the FOP, Fraternal Order of Police, Dr. Earl Stoddard, assistant chief administrator's office, and we're hoping to have joined us tonight Councilmember Will Jawando. So since we had this call, we have more on. This meeting is officially in order. We are recording live. We usually stream through our Facebook, but there's some technical difficulties with that, so we're not doing that tonight, unfortunately. It won't let us. But once this recording has been completed, we should be able to then upload it, hopefully without any trouble, for archiving records and historic purposes. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Mr. Lee Holland, president again. Lee, the floor is yours. Thank you for joining us tonight. And I didn't know we were getting haircuts, man. I didn't get the memo. You didn't send me the memo. I should have.
Thank you. You know, I appreciate everyone being here. I think we're supposed to do this last week, and it was my anniversary. And if I missed that, my wife was not going to be happy with me. So I'm glad we were able to reschedule this. I'm actually out traveling with my daughter right now. So I'm here to answer any questions, tell you how the membership of FOP feels about this bill, how we feel this bill would impact the law enforcement officers and the community. So any questions you guys have, please, I'm happy to answer. And I didn't know what dialogue you wanted to do this, Bishop. Like, am I supposed to just speak on how we feel? Is there going to be questions asked? I mean,
yes. I would like to first, of course, you to speak on how you feel about it, and then we can, if you're open for those Q&A time, we'll do that.
Sure.
Just to let everyone know, we got a message that from Will Jawando's office. He'll probably be joining us around 19:30 tonight. So again, please, Lee, feel free to.
As I testified at the public hearing, Lodge 35, we oppose this bill. We believe this is a bill that, again, will cause morale issues. Officers feel that, this is another reason that people, or certain reasons people don't trust Montgomery County Police, and this is a bill targeted only at Montgomery County Police, as this is not a statewide bill that would affect all law enforcement agencies in the state of Maryland. I think we go above and beyond what most agencies do within the state or in this country when it comes to consent searches that are allowed under the Fourth Amendment. And we, again, tell people they have their right to refuse this search before we even conduct the search. I've had this conversation with the county executive, Mr. Stoddard or Dr. Stoddard. There's some things I think we could do with the executive branch instead of this bill to strengthen the consent to search forms when we use them, to make it very clear that you have the right to refuse those search. I think the form, and I believe the county executive agrees, could be tightened up a little bit to make that a little bit better. But we don't see the need for this bill. We only find that this bill could make the communities in Montgomery County less safe because it takes a tool away from law enforcement officers to doing their jobs, to taking illegal guns or illegal drugs off the street. And I know that there's been quotes saying, well, only 1% of traffic stops lead to contraband, but that's not getting down to how many consent searches lead to something. How often are we using consent searches? That type of documentation is not out there. This bill also talks about collecting additional data. A lot of that data is captured on this, or would be captured needing the state system. So right now on traffic stops, all of our data collections on e-tickets, which is a platform that's run by the state. So to capture more data, it would be more, I would say, the best ideal thing would be if you were looking to capture more data, like time of traffic stops, number of officers, those sorts of things, would have that sort of platform into the e-ticks and something that'd be legislation through the state of Maryland is my belief. The data isn't an end all be all. Like, we're not totally against collecting data. The problem is we don't want to put the onus back on the officers to have to collect this data. There has to be an automated way to collect this. So if we could find an approach of doing that, I don't think we'd have a big problem, but we just don't want to put more work as getting piled on every single day with less officers and providing them with more tasks of collecting data or doing more things. So I'll stop there. And again, if any questions, please let me know.
Chuck, Chair recognizes Board Member Chuck, and then after the Board Member Chuck, the Chair recognizes a Parliamentarian George, in that order, please.
Thank you. All right, so Officer Holland, thank you for sharing that information. Allow me to share some, and I know that members of the PAB board had heard this before, so forgive me for repeating this. I had an incident with my son who picked up a friend in Washington, D.C. at the bus terminal, dropped them off in Rockville. My son admitted that he switched lanes without signaling, so he was pulled over, rightfully so. However, the officer then asked if he can search his vehicle. I have trained my son, counseled him, so he knows his Fourth Amendment rights. And he told the officer, no, you cannot search my vehicle. Well, the officer kept him there, repeatedly asking, why can't I search your vehicle? Finally, my son, realizing that there has to be probable cause, asked the officer, why do you want to search my vehicle? The officer's response was, well, based on the address on your driver's license, that's a pretty rough neighborhood. So I have two questions. Number one is, do you support that methodology of stopping and doing permissive searches? And if you do, please defend why.
No, I don't. So consent searches should be used when you cannot reach, probable cause, as you said, or have reasonable suspicion of something, or you should have reasonable suspicion that there's a crime being committed or that there's a reason you should go there. It should not be you pull over anybody and just ask them permission to search their car. That is old school policing. That has not been done around this area in a long time. We have, again, we changed our policies to make it so that way you have to tell them you have the right to refuse these searches. If they refuse these searches, you must stop. You must not continue asking. I'd have to ask, how long ago was this incident?
That was a couple of years ago.
So yeah, it was probably before the policy change, which again, we worked with the executive branch to make these policy changes. And I do not support that type of policing. There should be a reason you're asking for consent to search someone's car, and you must respect it when they say no, 100%.
So as a follow-up, if I may ask, since data collection was one of the things you mentioned, what's your position on collecting the data, or at least providing the data of every police consent search that an officer makes, so that we can identify who the officer was who made that search or that stop, that permissive stop?
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure what how the data is collected right now. Forms are filled out and they are put in a depository with the police department. I'm not exactly sure how those are published or not, but we do use consent forms and they are mandatory right now. Also, every consent search is on body worn camera as well. But again, that's an executive branch question. I'm not exactly sure how that data would be given out. I don't have an issue with that data being given out. Again, I just don't want to put the onus on the officer having to track all the information. I agree that the information should be out there and publicly available to people. I just want to figure out how that would be done.
Well, and the reason, and forgive me, Bishop, I don't want monopolize time here.
Yeah, we
But
don't want
the
to
reason why I'm
monopolize
asking
the
that
time,
question,
so this
I'm
be
sorry.
your last follow-up if you
Okay,
can, please.
no, the reason why I'm asking that question is because when I asked my son, what was the name of the officer, that was one piece of information because of this whole thing that he failed to get. So what's your position on that officer for every stop, consent search stop that he makes, whether it is agreed to or refused, that he provides some data that goes into a database so that we can know how many of these consent search stops they are making?
I believe that should already be done when they fill out that form. It should probably have their name on it. Also, state law now requires that during these interactions, any interaction, that an officer's name, ID number is made available to the person that they stop. Also, if this was a traffic stop, if there was a piece of paper issued, it would have the officer's name and ID number on that as well. So I don't see any reason why there's any problem. I believe the officer's information would be attached to that consent search form anyways.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
The chair, right before the chair recognizes George, just a follow-up question. The police, I just want to read from the chat. The police may have a policy that they advise that you can decline the search. It isn't the law, and in practice, they are not legally required to advise. I guess this is a question. Policy is not law. So I guess the question in that, if I'm reading this correctly, is are they legally to advise the person that they have a right to decline?
Right now, the policy is, the Montgomery County Police Department policy is that you must tell the person that they have a right to refuse the search. You also must use a consent search. That is not state law because the Fourth Amendment says that you have the right to conduct a consent search. A police officer can do that. But the policy in Montgomery County Police is we tell people they have their right to refuse the search. Now, our consent search form, again, I believe with the county executive, we can tighten up language so people are very clear on that.
President, the chair recognizes George, and then the chair also sees Dr. Stoddard hand. So in that order, George, you're next, and then Dr. Stoddard.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Holland, for your time this evening. One quick question, perhaps I'll have a follow-up, but initially from your opening remarks, you mentioned that the forms which the police department uses for consent searches could be better, could be improved. Can you elaborate on that? What do you assess could be improved?
Yeah, I just think a lot of the language is legalese, that it needs to be down to plain English. Like you have the right to refuse a search at any time if you give this permission. Like it just needs to be very plain and simple for people. It doesn't have to be, not everyone's attorneys or have a law degree. They just need to know simply that if I give someone this consent to search my vehicle, I give this officer this consent, I have the right to refuse at any time. And again, this goes back to training. And I think the officers do a very good job of this now, is that if someone says stop, they don't go any further. They leave it alone. They complete whatever stop they're on and they let the person go. Or if probable cause becomes available, then that is what it is. But that's I think you can just clean up the form doing that way. And like I said, the executive, I believe, is very supportive of that.
So just to follow up, thank you. When an officer stops a vehicle, the language in the form is legalese, perhaps. Do they are they trained to explain this verbally to whomever they're stopping? And to what extent is that explanation, that form available in multiple languages?
That would be a Dr. Steyer question, maybe on the multiple languages. I'm not exactly sure on the multiple languages. I believe there is a Spanish version and an English version. New officers are trained on consent searches. Yes. So you will learn that in the academy. And of course, things change over time. So new academy graduates are definitely trained more in the new policy than older officers. But we do refresher trainings, and there is memorandums and stuff that come out when we change policy. So everyone has been told, you should explain to people, as I said, that you have the right to refuse this search on this consent search.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
He recognizes Dr. Stoddard.
I was going to just answer a couple of these questions. I'm going to share my screen real quick and show you a copy of the form.
Copy that.
I think it will be instructive to.
While you're doing that, I just want to make a note that after Dr. Stoddard, the chair will recognize board member Kate.
All right, can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Yeah, so this is the language you can see here at the top. That's provided, and there is an English and a Spanish version. I've seen the Spanish version. I don't have it on my computer right now, but I could get it for the PAB. This is the form that's currently used. As you can read here, this top language was developed by an attorney, and obviously, as Mr. Holland alluded to, it is legalese, and the county executive does believe that this form should be modified to be a lot clearer, not just about the fact that you could, you not only do you have the right to not consent, but you have the right to remove your consent at any point during the conduct of the search itself. And that if you do not provide your consent, that you will not, you're not going to face any negative consequences from your decision not to consent. To Mr. Williams, Chuck, your questions earlier. I think it was sort of in the chat, and it was related to your questions. Obviously, if there's a policy violation, even if it's not legal violation, policy violations can be pursued by can have a complaint lodged, can go to the administrative charging committee, and policy violations, if an officer does not follow a policy, that is they're subject to the discipline per the Peace Accountability Act, and then obviously through the matrix. And so obviously that would be, a policy violation. You're right. It's not a criminal charge, but it is certainly administratively chargeable. And so I think that's an important part for the whomever asked that question.
Yeah, if I can clarify. Yeah, my question basically is that if a stop
We'll
is
wait for,
made,
let me do this. If everyone can please, because we have a lot to do, if you can just raise your hand to give the chair a chance to
My
recognize
apologies.
you, because I don't want to keep going over too much at the same, to give everyone a chance, but please, Chuck, do your follow-up. But just for now on, if you want to chime in, just raise your hand, so the chair can recognize you. Thank you so much. Chuck?
thank you. I just wanted to clarify, if a stop is made and the driver, for an example, or the citizen refuses a permissive search, what is recorded to show that this was asked? Even if they walk away and there is no search, is there anything that is recorded to demonstrate that a search was asked for and it was refused?
I don't believe so. On the body worn camera, it's obviously recorded if someone seeks consent, but on the form, it's only a form where it's an affirmative consent. So obviously, it's a good question, and frankly, I think that's not an unreasonable suggestion that if a consent search is sought and not permitted, that would be something we could work on the form to include in the future. I don't think that's an unreasonable thing to suggest.
Great question. Thank you, Chuck. I see that board member Kate's question was answered, unless she wants a follow-up. If she doesn't, the chair recognizes board member Greg. And then after that, I'll read a question from the chat. And just, again, just identify who your question is for. Again, the chair recognizes Board Member Gray.
Good evening, Officer Holland. The question is, you made the comment that when new policies go into effect, candidates coming into the academy automatically get trained on that. You then commented, I believe, that as far as officers in the field, memos go out to that effect. How is it documented that new officers, in fact, acknowledge the memo and have received training on the new policy? And is there a time stipulation as to how long it takes them to do that?
That would be in the training records from their academy. So I don't know how long it would take, but it would be incorporated in the entry level academy when they go over they go over basically all 1,100 directives. Now they go over some in more detail than others, but that would be when they do it in entry level.
I'm not speaking about entry level. I'm talking about officers that are already in the field.
Oh, I'm sorry. So it would come over as a training memorandum or a headquarters memorandum, one of the two. It would be put out through an email or through the directive policy, which is Paradigms, is the computer system. And then it would be, if it's like a major training issue, such as this would be, it would be followed up at our in-service training, which happens every year.
But okay, if I hear you correctly, you say it's followed up.
Again, Gregory, just we'll let you finish this, your follow-up question. And then we want to give everyone the chance that I can, but thank you. Please continue, Gregory.
Yeah, yes, I apologize. Okay, you said it's followed up with in-service training, but prior to the in-service training, how do you assure that an officer makes note as such policy change?
So again, it's given over in Power DMS, which is the new, it's where our directives are. And when they come up, they go to the officer sees it, they click a button and say that they've read it and they've acknowledged it. So that would track the officer saw it and received it.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you for that question. I want to read one question from the chat. I'm trying to go in between, and then after I read this question, the chair would recognize one of our newest member, Mr. Ron, right? Gregory, is your hand still up or no? Okay. Just a question from, again, the chat, and then we'll move over to Ron. Do you know if the states, and I believe this question is directed toward you, Mr. Holland, do you know if the state's attorney's office provides the forms in discovery in criminal cases? In the discussions with the Office of the Public Defender, they're saying we have been told that they have not seen these forms in their cases. This is a question read from the chat. If I can read that again, or you're clear on that question, Mr. Holland?
I'm clear. I would have to say, I don't know what the state's attorney's office process is, but an officer provides their entire case file to the state's attorney's office. What they disclose, I mean, they're supposed to disclose everything that's in the case file, but I guess it also depends on how long ago this was, because before 2 years ago or so, you didn't have to fill out the consent form. You could ask for consent, get consent, and conduct a consent search without filling out any form. New policy is you must use the consent form. So that could be some of the reasons why consent forms weren't put in discovery.
Thank you, Mr. Holland, for answering that question. The chair recognizes again Ron Wright, board member. Ron?
Yeah, good evening, and thank you, Mr. Chair. Just listening to board member Chuck Williams' recitation of his son's complaint, it just brought some things to mind. It may not have any real meaning at this point, but I think I heard you say, Chuck, that your son had this encounter 2 years ago, I believe. Okay.
I believe that was it. Yeah.
Was that it? And then, you know, it certainly sounded like from the recitation of the facts that the stop was improper, and there was a also a potential violation of his Fourth Amendment rights. I'm particularly concerned about the officer's response that he based the stop on your son's residence. You know, that is really concerning and potentially another constitutional violation. But my question is, for both the policy and potential legal violations, criminal or otherwise, is there a statute of limitations that we're working with internally? So that, and I'm not asking to reopen the situation. I don't know if Chuck's son made a complaint or not. But I think when that kind of behavior is experienced, there should be something put in place to correct that. And that is, I think, a gross, potentially violation in a traumatizing situation for our young citizens to have their residence questioned as probable cause for a police stop. So again, my question is there a statute of limitations on either the policy or legal misconduct of our officers?
As of July 1st, 2023, there is no limitation on when someone can file a complaint against a police officer, and the complaints can either go to the law enforcement agency or you as the PAB.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you for that question, and thank you for that answer, Mr. Holland. I want to just take a moment here to, again, thank you all for joining. Mr. Holland, thank you for just joining and taking these questions. I'd see, before I make a statement, the chair does recognize board member George.
Thank you, Chair. I just have a quick question for Mr. Holland. I know that we are getting up to time for other speakers here, so I'll try to make this brief if that's okay. I'm looking at the bill itself, and essentially what is provided here is that an officer, this act would prohibit the officer from solely relying on consent voluntarily provided by the driver or occupant as the basis to search the motor vehicle, sort of paraphrasing there at the end. What recourse would you consider, Mr. Holland, an officer would have to search a vehicle when they're not solely relying on consent? In other words, do you feel like there is something, is there anything else the officer can do or observe to be able to search a vehicle, assuming this bill is law?
So there would be two other ways that an officer can search a car: probable cause, they have probable cause, or a Carroll search, which is they believe that the person is actively armed and dangerous and that weapon is within their reach. They'd have to be able to articulate that to have a search or Carroll search. But besides that, those would be the only other reasons.
Well, technically also a search incident to arrest, correct?
To arrest, search incident arrest, which I was following under probable cause because you'd have that because you've arrested the person, but yes.
Thank you again for that question and answer. What I would like to do before we introduce Dr. Stoddard is the chair recognizes board member Gregory, and I would just say we don't have time for a follow-up question to your question, but please, you do have time to express your question in your statement. Board member Greg.
Apologies, I hit by accident. I do not have a question.
Oh, I'm sorry, didn't want to miss you there. So yeah, all right. Again, Mr. Holland, thank you again for joining us tonight and answering these questions. Thank you for your statements. Are there any closing words or remarks or anything you want to share as far as emails or contact in which we can reach you, sir?
Sure. I just appreciate everyone's time here. I'm happy to answer any questions. I look forward in the future to working with the Police Accountability Board and making sure that, you know, everyone in our community and our police officers get together and work together. And I appreciate the comments. You guys can email me anytime at FOP35mail@FOP35.com. And I'm happy to answer any other questions you guys may have on this bill or anything related to policing in Montgomery County.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Holland. We appreciate that.
Great.
And we appreciate your willingness and openness to work with us, the PAB, because we all are part of the same community. So thank you very much for that and being patient and open to these questions. I also like to say that if we do not get to all of the comments and questions in the chat folder, please do not think we are ignoring you. This is being recorded live, and what the PAB tries to do is we try to go back to these recordings and look at some of the questions that we may have missed. And if time permits with our schedule, try to answer some, maybe not all, but some of the questions, and then post them on our mocopab.org website. So please do not be offended if we don't get a chance to get to your statement and or question tonight, but we do thank you for your participation. At this time, we want to, I don't think he needs any introduction, especially after his performance in reference to the tornado effect. So after that, he's our acting director. Thank you for stepping in for that. Dr. Earl Stoddard, Assistant Chief Administrative Officer. Dr. Stoddard, thank you for
All
joining
right,
us.
so thank you, Bishop Walker. And for tonight's purposes, obviously, in wearing my current hat as an Assistant Chief Administrative Officer for the Office of the County Executive, and I work to coordinate his public safety portfolio, among other things. And so obviously this falls underneath my policy purview. And so I wanted to give the perspective of the county executive as well as the police department on this particular piece of legislation. I do also have some additional data I'm happy to share with the Police Accountability Board that we've had in place. So in summary, the county executive does not support elimination of consent searches at this time. What he does support modifying the form to be much clearer about the right of consent in a less legalese way, the ability to limit the consent in to specific places and things, and the ability to remove consent at any time during the conduct of the search, and that there can be no consequences from someone providing or not providing consent, or there can't be any, can't be held against them if they refuse to provide consent, that is. He also does want to work with Lodge 35 to allow for body-worn camera review of consent searches as a general principle. And obviously we do that for use of force, for example, now already. Candidly, we've had a random body-worn camera review program, which the county executive is interested in looking back at as a general principle. We're not reviewing very much body-worn camera footage as a general way of through random search. Only about a few hundred of tens of thousands are reviewed on any given in any given year. And so obviously we think that there are other AI-based tools now that might make for a broader body-worn camera review, but also allow us to do specific reviews in certain cases like uses of force or consent searches. And so that's something that the county executive is interested in working with Lodge 35 to figure out to get to a place where we can do that kind of thing. Also, the county executive is very supportive of data requirements around consent search reporting, reporting those out in a very public forum, both for those who do consent and those who do not. I did want to provide some data on that. So as I think you saw on the top of the consent form was put in place with the policy in February of 2023. So for the first year of that policy, so through February 2024, there were a total of 291 requests for consent. And in those cases, there were 268 granted and 23 consents declined. In those 268 affirmative consents, there were 274 things searched. And The difference there being you can have a search of a premise, a search of a vehicle, a search of a person, or search of a property. And in some cases, multiple things were searched under a singular consent search form. As you saw in the form, you could check multiple boxes to allow for that to happen. And so there were 274 total things searched during the first year of the consent search form and associated policy. Through those searches, a total of 10 firearms were recovered, 2 CDS or controlled dangerous substance, 1 evidence of identity theft. Essentially, IDs were found that were not belonging to the person for whom the search was conducted, and 1 theft from auto. So items were found during the conduct of the search that were both used to steal from vehicles, a Jimmy, and items from stolen vehicles were found in that search. So a total of 14 different things across the 260 or 74 total items searched. Just for the benefit of the Police Accountability Board. And so I think that sort of summarizes where the county executive is. His rationale are, we had a total of 37,103 traffic stops during calendar year 2023. Of which there were 15 traffic stop related complaints that were filed. So 0.04% of stops resulted in a complaint. None of those complaints were related to consent searches during the entire calendar year 2023. And so obviously in the absence of evidence that there are, there are complaints that are coming in on consent searches, and under the premise that it could have a negative impact on morale. And candidly, there's been a number of police reforms implemented in the last several years for which the county executive is interested in seeing those, be in place for a period of time before we want to expand that reach. He does not want to send the message that, police officers in Montgomery County are conducting illegal searches or doing things that are inappropriate, absent there being evidence that's happening. And so at this point, that's his position is he does not support the elimination of consent searches. He does support strengthening the checks and balances that exist in place about informing the public and reviewing those consents when conducted, absent any additional information suggesting that they're being done illegally. So I will stop there and we'll entertain additional questions.
Thank you, Dr. Stoddard. First, before I ask one of the first questions in the chat and then recognize any of the members, I want to say thank you. I believe Councilmember Jawando has joined us. If I am mistaken, I apologize, but it looks like I see his profile picture.
Yeah, I'm here, and I'll be on camera shortly. But thank you. Yes, I'm here. Good to see you.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you for your time. We appreciate you tonight. One of the questions, Dr. Stoddard, that I just want to read right quick, and then recognize any board member or anyone. How is the data gathered if the form was not used? How would that violation of policy be detected?
So we have a system called eJustice, which sort of uploads all the information in traffic stops, and they simply did a search of the eJustice system for all traffic stops, looking for consent searches where consent was sought. That said, I think it is entirely reasonable that the form would include a better tracking to say that consent was sought and not provided, to ensure that we have a standalone piece of documentation around that point. And so I think that is something that we could work, that I think would be very reasonable to work with the police department to modify their policy to allow to happen moving forward.
Thank you for that question, and thank you for that answer, Dr. Stoddard. The chair recognizes, I believe, board member Ron. Did I see that hand raised?
Yes, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Dr. Stoddard, for that information. I don't know, for what it's worth, did you tabulate the number of arrests, prosecutions, and/or convictions resulting from the firearms and contraband and other like criminal offenses? resulting from the consent searches?
I don't have that data. We certainly could go back because I do have the case numbers for all of the cases associated with those. So we could certainly go back and look at what the result was for any of them. I got a brief descriptor of sort of a paragraph description of what each incident was and the case number for it. So we could go back and look, but I don't have in front of me the adjudicate. Within the police department, obviously, that the state's attorney's office and the justice system does the prosecution and then all that piece of it. And so the
Right.
police really is focused on tracking the arrest-based information and through that, of course, that said, we could find that information, but I don't have it in front of me.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Stoddard. The chair recognizes Board Member Kate.
Thank you, and thank you, Dr. Stoddard. That was very helpful. You mentioned that the county executive is supporting more review of body-worn camera information. Can you just talk a little bit more about what he's thinking along those lines? How that would be conducted? What additional things would be reviewed?
Yeah, so right now, for example, we review all uses of force like that. Your supervisor, you're typically reported up, your supervisor reviews it, and there's a determination made, that it was appropriate, or if there's an additional need for training, or if there's a complaint that comes from that. For the most part of I think it's 40,000 or so body-worn cameras images that we get in a year, a very small number of them ever get any sort of real review just because there's so much data that's collected. And so the random body-worn camera review, this is the council legislation that was proposed a number of years ago. And there are two sergeants that do they do random body-worn camera review. They identify both policy violations or other things that officers do. For the most part, what we found that they find are typically very relatively minor. You didn't fill out this form and you didn't complete this report in a timely fashion, or we had one situation where there was an officer who was verbally reprimanded for not having, when they were alone in their car, they didn't say turning body-worn camera off when they turned off their body-worn camera, and that's a policy violation. But it clearly that we should be looking for things that are more serious, and we should be focused on more serious violations of decorum interaction with the public. I know for example, the Police Accountability Board as part of your annual report last year, you talked about programs like Trulio that can use AI-based detection of, racial slurs or raised voices or use of inappropriate language. And we could, do body-worn camera review searches for things like that, amongst other things, and get a much broader swath of the video being searched. In many cases, I think you'd find that those are coming from bystanders or members of the public, and they wouldn't necessarily be officers. But then you'd be finding and identifying things that were more critical for interactions with the public, for example. And so the county executive believes that we're just not fully utilizing the body-worn camera in the way that we need to, and because we're generating so much body-worn camera at this point that it doesn't feel good for the officer who gets the verbal reprimand for a very minor policy violation, because their luck of the draw was their video got pulled out of tens of thousands, when there are potentially other things that are just entirely being missed because of, frankly, luck and happenstance. And so we think that it would be much better to do a more targeted, rigorous review for major violations than a random periodic review of a very small number where we're finding, again, minor violations. And so that's the county executive's perspective on it generally. Now, consent searches, obviously, I think that this, because there is, public concern about this, I think county executive would support and does support a concerted body-worn camera review. There are only obviously 268 of these that are occurring in any given calendar year. That's not a tremendous burden to review for supervisors. And so it would, he would support making it one of the categories that is just mandatory review to make sure that there's no Fourth Amendment violations happening. And so that would, sort of alleviate any, it would further alleviate public concern that there's malfeasance occurring that isn't being reported, that we're not seeing complete, complaints about, but it would go further to allay public concerns about that.
Thank you, Dr. Stoddard. Before the chair recognizes, Board Member George, want to read a question, directed toward you, Dr. Stoddard, from our chat. Can Dr. Stoddard clarify if the 268 searches were based on 268 forms submitted, or is that based on another evidence that is consistent or that is consent search was conducted?
I 100% know that it was not 268 forms. The policy as it currently reads, and this is something else the county executive is interested in understanding, is basically officers are expected to take make every effort to get a signed consent. But there are certain cases, like for example, if it's pouring rain outside, where they may not be able to get a written consent on a form like that. We do think that having them all be written forms, so we have tracking on them, would be better. And I do not know the exact breakdown. I'd have to go back and I do think I have it somewhere. I just don't have it in front of me of how many were written versus verbal. Now, obviously, in the case of a verbal consent, they're required to go through the same dialogue that's on the form and get the verbal consent on camera. But I don't know the breakdown. I 100% can confirm it's not 268 of 268. There were some that were not. There are some that are verbal. I just don't have the breakdown in front of me, and I would not want to misquote.
Oh, absolutely. We appreciate that, Dr. Stoddard. If you, and as soon as you can get that piece of information, the PAB would like to be able to have that as well to put in its purview for our research. The chair now recognizes George.
Thank you, Chair. I think you were just explaining what I was about to ask for, which is, Dr. Stoddard, thank you for that information. I take it that driving the decision to focus on improvements on the form versus limiting searches is that data that you are providing at this time. I'd request that if you can forward that data to the PAB, as much detail as possible. In aggregate would be fine if there are issues of personally identifiable information. I think it would be important for the PAB to take a look at that, dive deeper into what that data looks like. The other thing I think is more of a comment here on, as you mentioned, PAB has done some work already on body-worn camera footage policy and procedures, and has issued some recommendations as it relates to that. So I'll just re-emphasize that. I think that's an important point that you bring up, and something that we believe will not only assist officers training and coaching individually, but law enforcement agencies more broadly, and therefore the county, by being able to track sort of that information, that coaching, that performance, professionalism of law enforcement officers more broadly. So this is a sign of encouragement to me, and I'd hope that we can work together with the county executive and law enforcement agencies on moving that forward.
Thank you, Board
And I
Member.
will provide that, just to answer, George, I will provide, I'll get you the data that I have. We also do have as I described before, there are really 4 categories of things that can be searched: premise, vehicle, person, and property. And I have the breakdown of those for the 274. We do have demographic data and subject, gender, well, with some blanks on that form, but yes, we have that too. So I can provide that data.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Stoddard. We're moving right along pretty good here. We again thank Council Member Will Jawando. It's good to see your face, sir. Thank you for your time. Glad that your travels were safe to your location. Dr. Stoddard, are there any final or closing remarks, sir, you want to make, alibis, or anything like that?
No, I just appreciate the opportunity on behalf of the county executive to talk about this, and obviously look forward to working with the Police Accountability Board on this issue and any other. As I said, I think we were very interested in the Police Accountability Board's report on body-worn camera review, and certainly have been looking at that as a potential avenue forward. I think that would actually, well, depending on how it was implemented, might require some legislative change. So we'd have to work with council to do that. But we are interested in pursuing that as a general to broaden, and look for more egregious violations, because we just don't. I'm not sure that the random review at this point is meeting the intent or the objective of what people want it to find. And I think there are tools that did not exist when that legislation was passed that would really get more to the heart of what I think was the intent of that legislation. So thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Stoddard, just a quick follow-up. We know that we're coming into the holiday. I know everyone is bracing, and we hope that everyone keep all your fingers and toes and everything during the holiday celebrations. But Dr. Stoddard, how long would you need to get that information to us, just for a point of us having an after action?
Yeah, the data, you tell me about the data? I have it. I had a synopsis in front of me, but it doesn't have some of the bullet points that were sought. So I know I had to just pull it up from several emails that I got, because I asked some very similar follow-up questions to the police department in gaining this data, and I know it was ultimately provided. It just I didn't have it on my one screen summary, and I don't want to try and dig through and find it, but I have it, so I can provide it next week, certainly before you meet again.
Roger that. Thank you very much, sir, for answering that. Again, we thank you. We're moving along pretty good here. What is it? Almost 1953, going into 2000 hours. Thank you again, Mr. Holland, Dr. Stoddard. We have now Council Member Will Jawando. So I wanted to take this time to, not that he needs an introduction, but we'll give him an introduction anyway. Thank you, Council Member, for joining us tonight on such an important topic, for joining the PAB. So at this time, sir, I want to introduce to all those watching and sharing with us, Council Member Will Jawando. Council Member. Can you hear me, sir? Let me see if I can unmute you. There you go.
There we go. I
sir.
got it now. Yeah, I didn't have permission to unmute, so thank you. I
There you
appreciate
go.
it.
My apologies. My
Yeah,
apologies.
none at all. None needed. Good to see you all, and thank you for taking the time to dig into this, and also being flexible with the scheduling. Really appreciate that. So as you all know, this is just want to give you just a quick catch up on timeline, and then just make a few points, and then talk about questions. I introduced this Freedom to Leave Act, as you know, back in February of this year. It followed, it was a component of the STEP Act that I introduced last year. All the years are running together, but 2023. And obviously we had the Attorney General decision on the traffic stop data and on the ability to not have stops be able to happen. So we took out the consent search piece that we do have the authority, and that's what this bill is. I also hope that we had a public hearing in February, that if the PAB has not seen, I really encourage you. It's worth watching. I know I've spoken to many of my colleagues. I've often talked about who were deeply moved by a lot of the testimony, and not unlike other things, I think policing is probably at the top of this list. It is experienced very differently depending on who you are and where you live, just because of how the system has grown up, and how the principles of law enforcement have grown in over time. And you heard there was very compelling testimony from individuals who have been impacted by consent searches about why this is important. And many in the African-American community in particular, but other communities know this personally. It's not a theoretical thing. It's not a maybe. It only happens 268 times out of a year out of 40,000, which I'll get back to that data point in a second, but not to bury the lead, there's no way that's correct. There's no way that we're calculating the numbers correctly. And I'll have Marisa from my team who's on here post the site to this, but there's been research and data and analysis done across the country going back to 2005, but more recently, that suggests that across the country, in Montgomery County, we are a great county, but we tend to be pretty much right in the middle because we're so big and we're so diverse. We tend to be right along with national trends on a lot of numbers, a lot of stats across any indicator, just because of our size and diversity. But across the country, 90% of searches, all searches of people, persons, autos, are done via consent. 90% in several studies. So you can't. And one of the things, the numbers I didn't hear Dr. Stoddard say, and I have not been able to get from the department in a clear way, which I think the PAB would be interested in getting, is the number of total searches. Okay, so what is that total search? Not just how many cars were stopped, but the total number of searches of persons, people, and autos, and broken out, right? But what has been represented, whatever that number is, it's tens of that. I don't know the number, so I know that there's tens of thousands of traffic stops, but the real number we need to be comparing is that we need to find out how many of all searches are being done via consent. So what's the total number of searches of people, persons, and autos, and then how many are done via consent? We got a partial, which I would say is a dramatic, probably an underreported number based on how we've been collecting data. The fact that this policy really wasn't even in place or even written until about a year ago. In that there were 268 consent searches last year, I think was the number given. Again, we need to know the number of searches, and we need to know, and given the national data around consent searches generally, it is a primary tool used. And I, from my personal lived experience, from the experience of being here my whole life, of hearing folks in testimony, particularly in certain communities, this is not something that's used infrequently. So we need to really, the data piece, and that's why this bill has two aspects, right? And I start there because I wanted to make sure we don't forget about this. A lot of the things that you heard Dr. Stoddard and I think Mr. Holland talk about around data, need for better data collection, that's a 50% of this bill is increased and improved data collection around consent and around stops in general. And so that is a big part of the bill, as you all will remember, and reporting of that data. And the other provision, obviously, is related to consent searches and prohibiting consent searches unless there's probable cause to believe a crime's been committed, which obviously some of those searches, right, that are done, many of those searches are done via other mechanisms. I think it's also important to remember that there are a lot of ways to legally search. If you have reasonable suspicion, if you think probable cause that a crime has been committed, you can search, right? If there's things incident to a legal search, there's a lot of ways to search that aren't consent. And I don't think anyone's arguing that. So that's important to remember as well. Right now, as was said, an officer can ask a resident to consent to a search, even if they don't have any legal grounds to do the search, right? And so I think we need to ask ourselves that basic question. Why are we allowing that, given the disproportionality in who is searched and who is stopped, which we know you all have seen those numbers, is just disproportionately people of color and in communities of color, given the dramatic and very large power imbalance between police and residents, right? And there was some data cited about folks who have said no. Those are the exceptions. The vast majority of people who are asked to consent do. or they initially say no, and then the search is extended, and they say, well, do you really want me to do that? Do you want me to get the dogs out here? Do you, there's other things, and then they feel pressured to have to do it. And again, this power imbalance, someone who's authority of the state with a gun, with a badge, saying, can I search? We know in the African-American community, the president of the United States 2 years ago in a State of the Union talked about the talk that Black families have with their children because of the, unfortunately, a real fear and danger associated with law enforcement interactions for many communities. Again, and this is not about an individual officer. This is about a system and how it's grown up over time in the tools that we deploy. We also had an event recently from the former Utah Salt Lake City police chief, who works for the Center for Policing Equity now, and Christy Lopez, who leads the Criminal Justice Center at Georgetown University Law School, and who was one of the key authors of the Ferguson report and the investigation there, talking about how the broad use of consent searches really disincentivizes other police tactics that lead to more fruitful and beneficial searches that are based on evidence and not based on, oh, I have a feeling and let me ask you, because we know from the data, it's clear who's asked and who's not, and who's stopped and who's not. And this is not banning anything. This is just recognizing that the imbalance, the power imbalance is there, that these are not fruitful searches, and they have a corrosive impact on the community members. And again, I'll just ask you please to watch the video of the hearing if you haven't seen it, of people who have been impacted by this. Most of whom, I think almost all of whom actually, never filed a complaint. Just a word about complaints. Our complaint process needs a ton of work, right? It's gotten better since I've started on the council, but most people don't complain. One, they don't know how. Two, they're worried about, potential retaliation, or they just don't think anything's gonna happen from it, or go down the list. But we have a very low number of complaints. I think the number of complaints that were said out of the 40,000 traffic stops, we have 15 complaints. There's no way that is indicative of people who probably wanted to complain. And so we got to do work to make sure people know how. There's some jurisdictions that pass out a card, almost like customer service. Like, how did I do today? There's things we need to do to get more feedback, not just complaints, but also positive things that happened. And so I think that percentage that was thrown out by Dr. Stoddard, 0.004%, only those people complained, is in no way related to what is happening in these cases, just because of how hard and the challenges with complaining, similar to the power imbalance issue. And so, and I'll give you another, there are jurisdictions, the last kind of set of points I'll make here, just make sure I'm saying everything I wanted to say. In Portland, and there's several jurisdictions that have already done this, right? So we're not starting from scratch here. The entire state of Connecticut, Portland, Oregon, certain jurisdictions in California have limited or completely removed consent searches. In Portland, for example, when they did so, a study showed that contraband recovery actually increased. So the amount of contraband that they recovered after they banned consent searches, they had a better recovery rate, meaning they recovered more than when they were doing consent searches. Because you have this needle in the haystack thing. If you're just searching everybody, it's kind of like stop and frisk. If you have the ability to just ask anybody, there's much less forethought that goes into targeting who we ask and why we ask in the investigative tactics that are used. So it can seem counterintuitive, but if you think about it, it's not. And in a jurisdiction that eliminated consent searches, they actually turned around and had a higher recovery rate and less crime on indicators. So the idea that this is going to lead to lawlessness or something, it's not true, and it's not borne out by jurisdictions that have done it. And again, as someone who I'm not just telling you to watch the videotape. I've talked very publicly about when I was working for the police department in 2000 as an AmeriCorps member in the 3rd District. I was pulled over 10 times that one year. I was never charged for anything, but I was asked to have my car searched several times. And I was a 19-year-old kid with cornrows driving to East County every day from the police station. And I got pulled over 10 times in one year. We know, and actually I was just with Earl Clark, who used to head up MCPS security and is a retired Montgomery County police officer, who was involved in crafting the consent agreement with the Department of Justice that Montgomery County Police had in 2000 because of disparate traffic stops. And he actually came to a meeting we recently had with Christy Lopez, who's the Georgetown law professor, and the former Salt Lake City police chief, again, who are advocating for banning consent searches because it's not effective and it has a disproportionate effect and corrosive effect on certain communities. And he actually, said, he said to me, and he said, I could say this, we have work to do. This is a challenge for us. And it's not just a challenge for us, it's a challenge for us, the country. And the question is, how do you have effective and fair searches that keep everyone safe? That's what we all want, right? That are actually a good usage of time. And I think the data has shown here that these are not good uses of time. It's corrosive on certain communities disproportionately. And in places that have done this, they have not seen increased crime. They've actually seen a higher recovery rate, and if any change in crime rates, and a decrease. And now Marisa can put some of these items in the chat. But Connecticut, I'll just mention another one. They have a ban on consent searches as well. Again, the entire state of Connecticut. And if you think of Connecticut, those of you from this area, they have some rough cities. They have some tough places like Bridgeport. I was in Bridgeport a few years ago. They have some places where crime is an issue. Consent searches are banned. Since they banned them several years ago, they have seen a reduction in racial disparities about who is pulled over, which is what I think everyone on this group would like to see. We'd like to see disparities in enforcement go down. And Connecticut has seen that since they put this in place. Again, there's no solve or cure-all, but this is a piece of that pie for sure. Because again, you have to hone why you're pulling somebody over a little more. So with that, I'm happy to stop, but I just think that this is a common sense proactive measure that I want to speak to the morale issue. This is not about our police are racist and we got to make sure they're not treating people poorly. Are there racist police? Absolutely. Are there racist people in the world? Absolutely. That's not what this is about. This is about a policy. I'm into policy and outcomes and how we are making effective use of time and reducing disparities. And we have to understand how our systems developed and where we focus and why we focus and how some tactics lead to disproportionality. And this is one that does. And it's not worth, not only it's not effective, it has a really corrosive impact on certain communities, particularly communities of color. So I think we could show folks that want to be police officers that, hey, we're taking a step forward and doing something differently because we think this will be better for our public and help hone and focus the time of our officers. So I'll pause there and happy to take any questions or comments.
Thank you, Councilman. Are there any comments? The chair recognizes Chuck, Board Member Chuck.
Thank you. Councilman, thank you for sharing that. I did ask our initial guest the question regarding stops. If a consent search is sought and it is declined, are we collecting data that took place as well as those where a consent search was carried out? What's your take or feeling on that? And can you elaborate on it?
Yes. So thank you, Chuck. I appreciate it. The data, again, half this bill is the data, because we do need better and more data around all sorts of interactions, and we need to make it easier for officers to collect it. We need to make sure it's credible and it's reported right. I've been working really hard on that. I had a bill related just to police data, that had passed, and we're working on that. And so I think I heard Dr. Stoddard say that he's not, to your question, I want to make sure that if someone said declined, if they were asked to consent and they declined consent, is that what you said? Yeah, I heard him cite some number, and there, yeah, I think he's back, but I have not personally viewed those numbers. I don't know if that was out of the 268, but I saw you pop back on, Earl. I thought I heard you say a number related to decline, like in the 20s or something.
Yeah, it's about 10%, 20, sorry, I don't have it in front of me. 23 of 291, so that gets you to 268. So it's 23 out of 291 were declined. So 291 were requested consent, 23 were declined, 268 were consent was provided, and that led to 274 total searches being conducted, because some of those 268 led to two things being searched.
And what the 23 decline is that this is last year's data, or what's the time period that data you just said?
February 23 to February 24, which is the first year that the policy and form were in place.
Right. Got it. So yeah, I don't know what the question was, Chuck. I mean, I think I do think that obviously one of the issues here too is, Earl, since you're on, I mean, how many searches were conducted? Do you have that number?
I don't. You mean like incident to arrest? I don't have all those other probable cause searches. I don't. This is specifically on consent searches. We could ask that data.
Yeah, so I do think that's a number we want to just keep in mind, because again, either we're a huge outlier, like again, I don't know the universe of consent searches, but as I said, there's been multiple studies that have said that 90% of all searches are consent searches. Either if that were true for us in only 268, if that was the 90%, I don't know how many searches are conducted in a year. I don't have that. I don't understand. Earl doesn't.
I mean, I could say, right. I mean, we have more. Every arrest is going to result in a search incident to arrest. And
right.
We arrested far more than 268 people last year. Right. I'll tell you that much, right? So I can't say, I can't point to something that's going to say, well, I can't imagine that there's a universe of 1,000 other consent searches that we don't know about. I've done 10 ride-alongs in the last year. I've never seen a consent search. So I don't know with what regularity. I mean, traffic stops are down 70% from 2-3 years ago in total. So searches are inherently going to be down, for that fact alone.
Right. Yeah. And I don't know the percent. That's a good point. The traffic stops are down. Pandemic, obviously, less people were driving. They went way down. But yeah, so I don't know if that answers your question, Chuck. I mean, I do think we need to have a better handle on, obviously, if someone's arrested, something led to there's obviously a gray area of sorts when, if there's probable cause to search, right? Again, this bill doesn't impact those searches, right? If someone sees a gun or they have some sort of police investigatory reason to search somebody, those are all legal under the Fourth Amendment. You don't have to ask for consent. Then there's a universe where that's not happening. And again, this policy was in place. So we need to that's a number we need to keep track of, and I guess 23 of 291 is the percentage Earl just laid out of the data we have. But I do think we need more and better data, which is part of this as well. Because, there are circumstances where, you can imagine a circumstance where someone is searched and then, or Terry stopped and we don't know what has not been, was that reported? If nothing was found, if there was consent given and it was retracted, like there's just a lot of, and I think that's where the body worn camera footage review, which is, I completely agree that the way we're doing that is not effective. And I think everyone agrees on that, so we need to find better ways to get a better sample.
Thank you for that. Just want to point out in the chat before we recognize some of the board members. Thank you again, council member. And just want to point out, if you look into the chat, Marissa has placed a link there to go and listen to that hearing. She specifically pointed out Professor Christy Lopez, I believe it's professor, testimony as pertinent information and data. So you can go and listen to that specifically. There's also some information in the chat from SSJC sharing some information. You can go, please, if you're at your leisure, to look at those articles regarding the fertility of information, the people's right to refuse to consent. That's there. And of course, again, you can see the website of the testimony of the public hearing, the Center for Police Equity, and referencing Oregon, example that Councilman Jawando just discussed. So you can see that as well. And just lastly, there's also a recommendation for everyone to listen to the testimony of Professor Josephine Ross regarding the cruelty of advising people of their rights to refuse to consent. Thank all of our community members for posting and sharing some of those things. So I just want to point it out to everyone listening and board that those specific links and sites are there. Final question is, will the PAB staff send the chat with links to all PAB members? All PAB members have access to this recording, and they're able to copy and link and do that. Thank you for that question. At this point, the chair recognizes George. George.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councilmember Jawando. It's nice to see you again.
You too.
I have a few questions. I'll ask one question and yield to my colleagues, and then if we have some time, I'd like to ask a couple of questions after that. One of the things that the PAB has also recommended and has looked into is the question of data. I think that's already been well established, but in particular, I want to focus on the primary reason or the initial reason for a stop. A lot of the data that we have and that is available provides initial reasons for a stop that cannot be the initial reason for the stop. Things like, licenses and insurance information and the like, for which some other reason must exist to stop a vehicle. In that case, given that the bill you're proposing would demand that of police officers or law enforcement agencies, by which process would that? What is the workflow that you anticipate or that you envision for officers to be able to report on the initial reason for the stop? Because right now, that's sort of the language that's being used in data currently, the initial reason for the stop, but the accuracy of that data is what is lacking. How do we enforce? How do we track that the initial reason is in fact the initial reason?
Yeah, it's a great question. There's something that has come up, and I know I've spoken to county executive and Dr. Stoddard about this over the years, where you check all the things that you pulled. So if there's multiple violations and it was unclear from this current system about which was the first, even if you wanted to indicate it was just whichever one you checked first. I believe they've made some progress on that point. And I'd let Dr. Stoddard speak to that if he has anything to say on that. But I agree with you that that's a critical point. We've put you know, I asked about this during the budget. We put money towards, you know, we have paid many years ago for monies for a new records management system. That fell through, and it sounds like it was good that it fell through because the company we had contracted with was not a good one. But, you know, we have not made, I asked the new chief Yamada about this in my question when in his interview, and he committed to making this a priority. You know, I've been on the council going on 6 years, and we've talked about getting improved data those entire 6 years, and new systems and doing it better and investing in it. You know, my office has talked extensively with the very small group of people that are charged with doing the data analysis at the department, and the limitations to some of their capabilities. But certainly we have to have ways of making it easy and very clear through policy and direction to officers and practical about how they are going to collect this data, to say that this is a really important part about not only making sure we have appropriate interactions with the public, but that we're effectively doing our job of protecting and serving and focusing our time and limited resources appropriately. So I think this is among the chief things that are most important that we get right. And there are examples of technology and things out there to be able to track that. So I don't know if Dr. Stoddard has anything to say. I know that's something I think we have pretty vigorous agreement on as far as the need to do that.
Yeah, we do have vigorous agreement on needing better data from policing. And actually, I think as Councilmember Jawando stated, Chief Yamada did reference having, he said very often what happens is the first thing on the drop-down menu that applies, they pick because they're trying to get through their report fast, they can back on the road. And that thing is not often the most common reason. Speeding is probably the most common reason that you see of someone being pulled over in Montgomery County, but speeding is farther down the list. So they pick seatbelt violation or something like that. That was not the first thing because it happens to appear first of the things they pull people over. And so that is an area that we definitely need to improve. And we can improve that by, for example, we can modify the drop-down menus and, do things like that. We can by system, we can do it by training. The other thing I think we've talked about, I think we've actually had this conversation with Councilmember Jawando, is we probably need more civilian staff within the police department who are actual data experts. Police officers, for all the things that they're good at, data analysis and, not just visualizing data, but actually translating data into actionable policy specific information is not something that is inherently something that the police officers generally are good at. And so we need to get more, get some civilian expertise on data analysis and aggregation and presentation so that the public can greatly benefit from this. Chief Yamada also spoke about this. He's mentioned this 2 or 3 times to me as one of his biggest priorities to address data is because we can't make actionable decisions without better data. And so I think this is something that the county executive is very interested in. I know Councilmember Jawando. I think you would have near universal agreement amongst all sorts of people on the need for better data.
Yeah, thank you both for that. I agree wholeheartedly with that statement, and if anything would encourage or suggest, this is my opinion at this point alone, elaborating on how exactly that will be accomplished. Simply because, again, I think from my perspective, that is the case today. Like, as you explained, they are checking the boxes. They are essentially providing that information, but not in the way that we anticipate would be most helpful. So that would be something to see within the bill on how exactly that will be accomplished.
Yeah, I think I know I don't know if that's in this bill, but I know we had put that in in either a previous bill or, because we require okay, report these things, including I'm not sure if it's in this bill or not, but I'll need to pull it up, but I agree with you and it should be, and we'll see how this moves forward. We have our first meeting on the bill in the Public Safety Committee on July 15th, but I appreciate that. You're right. We have to get to the how, not that we agree it should happen, Did you have another question?
I'll defer to the chair. I have a couple
Oh,
of
yeah.
questions, Chair, but you're the master of the orchestra here.
Thank you. We're just looking, let me just see, all right, what I would like to do is, because I want to, within the time that we have left, I want to try to get everyone. It seems like no one else has a hand lifted. Okay, I do see Board Member Ron, I do see Board Member Kate. So George, I want to give them the time, and then if you have your follow-up. I just want to read something from one of our community members. Let me read this, and then in that order, we'll recognize Board Member Ron and then Board Member Kate. I want to make, let me read this from our chat. I want to make sure to lift up the fact that this bill also prohibits prolonging the duration of a stop based on consent. This is another way that officers coerce civilians into remaining on the side of the road so that probable cause can be developed to search their vehicle. We have no data on these prolonged stops or on how successful probable cause searches based on the consensual prolonging of a traffic stop are. Thank you for that comment from a member of our public.
And I can confirm that that's true. The bill does, and I mentioned that earlier, like it does stop that prolonging of, well, are you sure? And, you know, that kind of thing. Again, speaking to the power and balance.
Thank you, Councilman. I don't want to rush you, sir, if you want to still respond.
No. Go ahead. Yeah, I can elaborate on it more if people have questions, but that is a part of the bill. And I think it's a really important part of the bill because it speaks to the data we don't have, you know, potentially. And when it's also, when you have a policy, when you say don't do this, right? You know, it's one thing that you will automatically reduce the amount of it being done because you're not supposed to do it. Whereas you can say no to someone doing this is a totally different, you know, a point. And I think other studies have shown, and it was mentioned in the chat, because of the just enormous power imbalance of someone with a gun saying, "Hey, can I search you?" That the likelihood of that is very low, and it just, you know, is fraught with a whole bunch of other potential hazards, including the one mentioned here, the lengthening of it. You know, so just wanted to mention that. And thank you, Marisa put the bill text in there, which has the data requirements, which again, as I mentioned, was half of the bill there.
Yes, thank you, Marie, for putting that. The chair recognizes Board Member Ron, and following would be Board Member Kate in that order. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and Councilmember Jawando, good evening. First of all, I'd like to start off by thanking you for your vote of confirmation on my appointment to this board. So I really appreciate your help in that effort. My question is probably doesn't have much impact on the bill because we're already here. But I'm just curious in terms of yours and your staff's research on the other jurisdictions, including Portland, California, Connecticut. What, if anything, do you know about the involvement of the FOPs in those respective jurisdictions in formulating or agreeing to bans, and whether or not they also had accountability boards to help in that process? Probably there was some community advocacy, I'm sure, to get us to that point. But I'm just trying to figure out how the sausage was kind of made in those jurisdictions, got us to a complete ban.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, I think, we don't have all of that context, or we have some from folks who were involved in those other jurisdictions. I don't know about the level of involvement with the FOP, or if they, any sort of agreement there. I'm not aware of that. But I do know that there was, robust advocacy for this from different parties. Some of them included groups like the Center for Policing Equity and the Vera Institute for Justice and others who have law enforcement members. So there were law enforcement members who were involved. As I mentioned, the former Salt Lake City police chief is a consultant with the Center for Policing Equity and has advocated for this policy change, along with others in jurisdictions like Connecticut. But I do not know specifically about the on the ground involvement of FOP or others. That's I'll ask Marisa if she knows anything to put something in the chat related to that. But I'm not aware of how the sausage was made, which I think was a good way for you to put it.
Thank you, Councilmember.
Mm-hmm.
We'll hold off on the food references tonight.
I know it's always dangerous at 8:30.
Yeah, so we'll hold off on those. Chair recognizes Kate.
Thank you. And thank you, Councilmember Jawando, for your remarks and for all the really helpful data and research that your staff has supplied in the chat. That's all very, very useful. I would just love to hear your response, because I know that you didn't hear the full remarks from Dr. Stoddard, and there was a point he made about the county executive's position that I would just love to hear your response to. And the point was, we've had a number of police reforms in recent years. It's been a lot of them. And added to that is we've got a new police chief. And one of the points Dr. Stoddard made is the county executive would like to see the impact of those recent reforms before making any changes. We don't want to send a message that police are conducting illegal searches absent evidence that that's the case. So I'd just love to hear your response on that point.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the question. And I don't think I was on camera, but I did hear that portion. A couple things. One, I think we need to really get away from the view that police reform equals we don't support police. I think that, which is inherent in that statement, right? Even if you don't believe it, when you say it that way, like we've done a lot of police reforms and we don't want to seem like we're not supporting police. No, it's the opposite of that. When I talk to young people who maybe are interested, the 600 plus students at Montgomery College who are studying criminal justice, that some of whom might want to be law enforcement or CSI techs or parole officers, whatever, they want to see reform happening. They want to see change. Reform is a good thing. We should all be about reforming and improving all the time. And I think it's a false premise to say that because we're trying to improve or update, the way we do our work in a way that is more equitable and less disparate, that means we don't support police. I don't think that's the framing is not correct, right? In my view. And it's very hard, as with a lot of social science research, I'm a sociology major and did my statistics, to isolate one action that's going to give you all the outcomes you want, because it's so multi-layered. There's so many interactions that are happening. I do think in this case, related to stops, and like when you could, as they saw in Connecticut, that they saw a decrease in racial disparities in searches once they implemented this policy. I do think we could see that because it's a narrow set, especially if it's a small group. Like let's say of the 291 number is in the ballpark, right? Again, I think that's low, but let's say that it's less than 1,000 of these that are happening since in the new year, but they're 50-60% of them are happening to African-American folks. Like those are impactful and can have an impact, and we don't want that happening. So I think it also and of those 291, I think 10 things were found, or whatever the numbers are. then the question I think we need to ask too is like, well, why wouldn't we stop doing that if we see that it's not super effective, it's having a disproportionate impact, and data from other jurisdictions that have done this show that you actually have a higher recovery rate and lower disparities. I don't know why you wouldn't put that policy in place, because you're saying there's some, a theoretical morale issue with law enforcement. I think what we say, we want you to spend your time more effectively or most effectively. We also want to make sure that the community knows that we're trying to make sure that that's happening and we're reducing disparities. So I get why that would be said kind of off the cuff, but I just don't think I think I don't agree with the premise of it.
Thank you.
Thank you for that question and answer, Councilman. Chair recognizes George.
Thank you again. Just a quick question on thinking about limiting consent searches. I guess to what extent would you say limiting those searches protects the rights of those who are not committing a crime, are have nothing to hide? Is there an argument to that effect?
To how limiting consent searches protects the rights of those who have nothing on them, right?
Correct.
Yeah. Well, again, even by the data that was presented, that's the vast majority of people, and that's consistent with national data that most searches do not turn up things, right? The vast majority. And so I think they are the primary. Again, consent searches are not illegal. But they're ineffective and they're corrosive on public trust, and they're disproportionately used in certain communities. And so that's why I think it is actually the community you're talking about, the person who is searched multiple times or even once, that it's like, well, why is this happening to me? I didn't do anything wrong. And I feel bad about my community. I think that's not a good thing. And I think we can eliminate a good portion of those if we just limit searches to reasonable suspicion of a crime or probable cause. And there's a lot. The Fourth Amendment is very wide as far as what searches are allowed. I just don't think this is a tool. I think this tool does not yield a ton, and there are other routes to searches. And it protects the very population you're talking about, the hundreds of people. Let's just take this data, at least hundreds of people who were searched and nothing was found and went on their way, probably not feeling great, that they had to consent to a search. So I do think it does protect those folks, and will help focus our officers on the searches that, again, as the data showed in 2 places, Portland and Texas, and I appreciate that showing up, that contraband recovery actually went up when they got rid of these.
Thank you, Councilmember. Chair, I have one follow-up, but again, I know we're over time, so I want to respect everyone's time on this as well.
I think we have time for your follow-up. I don't see any other hand from the members yet.
I'll
make it an easy one, George.
Yeah, well, I'll try. I'll prevent myself from saying this will be my last question, but I think it will be. I just don't want to make any promises. And this is open to you, Councilmember Jawando, but also Dr. Stoddard. I don't know if Mr. Holland is still in, but my question is, in what ways can an officer establish probable cause? Can they do that effectively, establish probable cause, without the option of obtaining consent?
For the record, Lee Holland had to drop off.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just start with that. I mean, I wish we would have recorded the session we did with Professor Lopez and with the Salt Lake, because she kind of started running through like a whole, just what I would call Crim 101 on the Fourth Amendment, just how wide and deep and the authority of officers is to conduct searches. But it's significant. Again, but you have to use, so if you look at case law around what is reasonable suspicion and what's probable cause, that's a big list. Just it would be my short answer to you that of things. Oh, I think I see a weapon in the back. Is an example, or I saw a bulge, and then they were acting kind of nervous, like these are all things that have been deemed reasons to search withoof consent. So there's a lot of case law on that, and so I think it's an important point that you raised, that because some of the things have been said is, well, you're removing a tool from officers. No, it's not a tool if the person can say no. What you're saying, like if it's not if the person can refuse the search, it's not an effect and we look at the numbers, it's not an effective tool. There are many other tools that are more effective that lead to searches that yield contraband or weapons or other things. So I think there's a ton of case law on the Fourth Amendment and what probable cause and reasonable suspicion means, and they are very wide. It's a long list.
I'm definitely not a lawyer, George, so I definitely don't want to. I can't really. Nor was I trained as a police officer. Didn't stay at a Holiday Inn Express. None of those things. So I don't want to. I don't even want to venture to. There's a lot of lawyers on this call who I have a lot of respect for, and I would not even want to try to put myself in the shoes of trying to grasp all those things. So I mean, I'm dealing with what the numbers are put in front of me, and those things. So I won't go any farther than that. So
Thank you both.
So he didn't disagree with me. So that's good. That's good.
Well, I think you and I we often agree on some things. It's not unheard of.
I appreciate it.
Like the data piece, I think we're there. That's why I did not want to come on here and say the county executive opposes the legislation, because there are parts of Councilmember Jawando's bill that the county executive does support. All the stuff around the data, there's agreement there on. That's why I said specifically to the consent search prohibition. That's where the county executive, and again, this is not our style policy. This is
right.
The executive Elrich's position, and but I think there's, we're going to have a session on the 15th, as Councilmember Jawando said, and then we'll figure out where he and his colleagues wind up with the discussion, and we'll see where we go from there.
Yeah, and I do also want to mention, I know Dr. Stoddard mentioned the policy that started last year, and that is a best practice. It's better than the status quo of like requiring a signature and making it easier to read. I think again, I think the better practice is to just not have this be asked, and not have to go through that. But I do want to acknowledge that is better than some places, so I appreciate that. And I appreciate you all taking the time and considering this. And I guess my question to you is, I'm assuming you all are going to take a position on this bill, and that's why we had these discussions.
Well, again, it's what we are is just at a gathering stage.
Sure.
And I think that's the best where we are now. Of course, ultimately, there will be a clear, decisive decision on which way we go, or what the end result of gathering these and this analysis and these reports would be on behalf of the PAB. Yes, sir. But for right now, we're gathering, and this is a very important bill, and on behalf of the community, and which involves both sides. And so yes, it's very important to us, council members. So you'll definitely be hearing something soon on us as a result of this.
Appreciate it.
We appreciate you. We appreciate everyone all of our public and community members who commented in the chat, who've listened patiently. As we are reaching that mark of time, before we hear any final words or anything from the board members, which we do want to make it quick and wrap it up, we do want to first give any final words or alibis from Dr. Stoddard? Well, he just lost camera, so I guess he's done. Oh, nope, he's
No,
back.
I don't have anything further. Obviously, I'll switch hats for a second. So obviously, I'll follow up with you, Bishop Walker, and then if there's a policy position from the Police Accountability Board, we'll make sure it's prepared in a timely fashion. I think I've told you that if you want to be heard on this issue, you need to have it probably by the end of next week so that it can be part of the record for the 15th. So, yeah.
Yes, and that is the goal, and I have to actually plan for the PAB. Thank you. He switched his hat now to acting ED, and so we have that in our purview to meet those deadlines, council members. So because we want the voice to be heard on behalf of our community and who we're serving. So you can look for that. Again, so council member, any final words or anything like that?
No, I'll just say thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you for your engagement. Thank you for your service on this board, and for your concern for our community, and just really appreciate your leadership and just everyone working on this issue. And if you have any questions of me or follow-up questions or thoughts or from Marisa as well, we'd be happy to answer them. And Donna, good to see you. I'll give you a special shout out there. Good to see you. I haven't seen you in a while. So, but good to see everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you again, council member, for just consenting to be with us tonight. We appreciate all the information.
And happy 4th of July to everybody. Hope
Right. Happy
yeah.
4th, and I was about to say that happy 4th, sir, to everyone. And hopefully everyone will practice safety when celebrating July 4th.
Fireworks remain illegal in Montgomery County.
Yep, there you go. So there you are, right? So now we know you have to be safe.
And you won't need consent. If you have fireworks, there's no consent needed.
Roger that. Again, all of those chats, things that have been placed in the chats, we are recording live, so they will be captured and displayed. And we hopefully, Laura, our assistant administrator, who is outstanding, will work out the glitch and be able to post it on the mocopab.org and the Facebook pages. We will revisit those if time permit to get some of the answers to your questions, even into our after action plan. So thank you for all of those. I don't want to prolong the time, so if you can keep it short, 30 seconds. Any PAB members, last words? None heard. I want to just make it clear that what I did was intertwined the time for public comments in our session. That's why I was going back and forth with the chat and back and forth. So we did cover, or at least complete, that agenda, which was number 5, which was really subject to time. So I just intertwined so we can hear from the public, which I believe we did. So thank you for your patience on that. If there are no final words, I would like to make a motion to adjourn. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a second. All board members, before we take it to a vote, no final alibis or comments. All those in favor to adjourn? Any nays? The ayes have it. Again, thank you tonight, everyone. Enjoy dinner. Happy 4th. Be safe. Remember, it's illegal to have fireworks in Montgomery County, so you gotta practice safety. Cook well. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.
Night.